To tip off this NBA season on FanDuel, you can choose your own rewards, which means you can play your game any way you want.
I get to choose my rewards?
Yep.
Great! Now, excuse me while I lock in.
All customers choose your own reward right now in the FanDuel app. 21 plus and present in select states. 18 plus in Kentucky. Opt-in required. Rewards are non-withdrawable. Restrictions apply, including bonus and token expiration, leg requirement, and max wager amount. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And I'm very honoured today to be joined by the writer Susan Barrett. And we're here to talk about her book about murder during the Blitz. And well, it's not exclusively about that, but a narrative of an infamous and forgotten Blitz serial killer, Gordon Cummings. And her new book, All Cats Are Grey. So, firstly, welcome, Susan. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, and just before we went live on the recording, we were talking about research, how one researches historical fiction, and how the ways in which kind of research has changed. Susan's career has been in film and TV research. And so that seems like a really good place to begin, and then perhaps we can move on to look at the book. But firstly, Susan, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that changing picture.
Well, the enormous thing, the elephant in the room, is the internet, which makes things on the face of it so much easier. You can find out anything, that was really quite difficult in the past. I know that because I wanted to find out when the full moon was in the early days of 1942, and that's easy to find out. And I can find out what the cruising height of a Heinkel 3 is, which is, I think it's 27,000 feet. But that's something that's absolutely easy to find, which it wasn't in the past. But I think what you miss out on is the serendipitous sort of things, because much as it appears that the internet contains every answer to every question, it really doesn't. And I was just thinking about a previous book I wrote, which was set in the sort of 1890s, and particularly examined what happened to sort of orphaned and poverty-stricken children. I went to the Salvation Army offices, their archive, and they had the most amazing. You didn't know quite what to order, because you could order anything without really knowing what it was. But I turned up this amazing ledger, which was the entries that the wardeness had sort of filled in by hand of some of the women that they took in, the fallen women they took in off the street.
Yeah.
And she recorded their circumstances, which were absolutely fascinating. I remember one in particular was that most of these people were servants, most of these women were servants, and they'd been impregnated by usually the the master or the sons of the master. And this poor girl's circumstances were that she'd been given a room in which the son of the family stored his bike. So he had license to go in there and have sex with her. So that's how she got pregnant. But that kind of thing, because it's in sort of copper plate handwriting and there might be little marginalia and things like that, I don't think probably get transferred to the internet. And it's just seeing her handwriting is powerful. I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Whereas nowadays, I was, as I say, writing this most recent book, a lot of what I could find out was very easily available on the internet, but some things weren't. Like somebody on reading it said, because I mentioned Pepto-Bismol in 1941, or actually earlier, the 1930s, and she said, was it available in England? And I just thought, well, of course it was. It's an old-fashioned brand. And in fact, when I looked, it wasn't. It's American, and it didn't come to England until the 50s, I think. Anyway, I couldn't really find this information out. And in the end, I wrote to the archive of, what was it? Procter and Gamble. And they have an archivist. And so she told me this information, which was quite useful. So for the purposes of accuracy, it is accurate. So I had to take out Pepto-Bismol, but I did not find that on the internet.
I mean, I think one of the things that the internet gives us is kind of acceleration. So if you wanted to write a kind of a very, very superficial, perhaps even arguably very bad historical novel, or a historical account or a history book on any topic, and make it broadly accurate, you could, technically speaking, with the powers of the internet and AI, do it in a day, and it would be absolute garbage. And one of the reasons, not only is it, I think, that artificial intelligence can't do that, and you can find probably a huge broad amount of quite superficial information, but the one thing that acceleration prevents you from doing is taking time and considering the implications of something. When I did my master's thesis, it was about the visits of various kind of well-meaning left intellectuals to the Soviet Union in the 1930s, and what it is that you're always trying to do a kind of investigation game into the mentalities of other people, when it's perfectly clear that they knew an awful lot about Stalinism and what had happened. And you look at the writings of Beatrice Webb, she's writing all this sort of stuff about, well, they have had to have some people shot, but I mean, I'm sure Stalin is kind of making a lovely omelette out of these broken eggs. And finally, I had to just eventually put down all the work and go and think for a while about what I made of all the things I'd read. And I imagined that the Soviet Union in the 1930s was like this kind of almost this sort of cinema screen on which multiple people were projecting the movie that they wanted to see. And you've got this lovely new blank canvas. You had this revolution in 1917, and there's this new sort of ideologically new, notionally new kind of society. And you can create whatever fantasy you want out of it. But I could only come to that conclusion by doing that human process that the internet won't let you do, or isn't suited to do, of waiting and thinking and allowing thoughts to emerge based on what I'd read. And I guess writing fiction is probably, you have to have a similar sort of practice.
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think you can go at it in lots of different directions. You can also just look at photographs. I find that absolutely useful thing to do. Because you see things in photographs that perhaps you don't otherwise, that what clothes people are wearing and how they wear them. And a previous book called Fixing Shadows, one of the themes in that was about post-mortem photography, which was a big thing in Victorian times. So as photography came in, suddenly there was this chance to record your
Yeah.
deceased infant and have a record of it, because they often died so quickly after they were born. There was nothing really. And just looking at the expressions on the faces of some of these young mothers who are holding their baby, and they looked sort of as shell-shocked to have lost that baby as to have had it in the first place as lost it, in a way.
Yeah.
And you don't get that unless you look at those photographs, really. And the way that the sentimental way that people presented their babies, or the way that they tried to make them look that they were still alive.
Yes.
And the other thing I find really so useful is the authentic voices of people writing at the time. The what's it called, the mass observation
Yeah.
project. There was an absolutely fascinating diary by this young woman I think it was from the sort of just before the war until the war, and she was living at home with her upper working class parents, lower middle class parents, and round the corner was this disreputable bloke who was married, who was living in a boarding house that she, much older than her, she started having an affair with. And she's really quite unapologetic about this, which is not what you expect at all at that time.
No.
And her parents knew about it as well, and they didn't end up getting married. It was, she just, this affair went on for years, and she sort of, I don't know, she really quite enjoyed it, and but was a little bit worried about whether they'd get married or not. In the end, they didn't. But it didn't seem to matter very much. And that's not the impression you get from most social history, that it was, completely unacceptable behaviour, because it wasn't, obviously.
And there's a part of a book that I often cite on this podcast, Richard J. Evans' third book on Nazi Germany, where he talks about, there's a chapter called German Moralities,
Yeah.
where again it's taken from that kind of oral stroke people's history perspective of looking at as much as we can understand what people thought and knew at the time. And there's some quite surprising stuff in there about which kind of really goes against the narrative of fanatical Nazi support, and particularly around the Holocaust, of German citizens with a whole range of different views, from get rid of them, to hell with them, to I cannot believe it, even members of the Nazi party saying, well, I'm not a fan of the Jews, but I can't believe
Hold on here, this is unacceptable.
Yes, well, yeah. People going, this, are we doing this really?
It's very similar to today, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Not to kind of not that gets anyone off the hook, but it does say that we kind of, if we're trying to understand the past, we ignore nuance at our peril, But on that very topic, let's now talk a little bit about the book, about All Cats Are Grey, and tell us about that, and about the subject of the book.
Well, I suppose the hook, the opening sort of idea, is that there are these four very disparate characters, some of whom know each other, some of whom don't, who have all killed somebody in their past, which seems to us, hopefully, reading the book, was a necessary murder, really. And they come together to use those skills that they've learned as murderers to kill this serial rapist and murderer who was sort of haunting the bomb sites of Britain or London after the Blitz, which is a true character. There was somebody called Gordon Cummings who used that opportunity of the blackout and breakdown of sort of law and order, really, to rape and murder girls. He was caught, obviously, and he was hanged. But in this book, he's still called Gordon, but he's a slightly different character. But it was sort of inspired by him. But I mean, it was the other thing I just found so interesting is that we have this sort of version of Britain as plucky little Britain standing up against the might of the German army, and everybody pulled together, and we were all terribly sort of well behaved, and to some extent we were. But actually, there was an explosion of crime. Particularly in the blackout. Mostly it was sort of black marketeering and looting because of, all the damaged houses and things. But it was an opportunity for people to kill as well, because you could kill somebody, I don't know, mutilate the body a bit, and it looked like they were a victim of a bomb.
Obviously probably the name that most people know, well, if you follow serial killers of the Second World War,
Mm.
is a guy, Reginald John Christie,
Yes, of course, yeah.
about whom I think it was Richard Attenborough was played him
Mm.
in a movie.
And Gary
Um,
Oldman, is Gary Oldman in the most recent version?
yeah, could have been,
Yeah,
yes.
it's
The
very
sort
good
of,
actually.
um, and again, a really dark and distressing case,
Yeah.
and tragically in the Christie case, somebody was accused of his crimes and hanged.
Timothy Evans, yeah.
Yeah, hanged for it.
Yeah.
And eventually Christie was caught, and they realised their error, and Christie was finally hanged sometime after the war, I think.
Mm.
But I think firstly it does, as you say, it does contrast with this idea that we have of the Blitz,
Mm.
and that year of 1940. The three events: the Dunkirk evacuation, the Battle of Britain, and the Blitz, they're almost three foundational kind of myths that are of the three foundational myths of modern Britain, sort of
Yeah.
about
Who we
who
are, where
who
we
we
come
are,
from. Yeah.
who we are, where we came from, and what
Yeah.
the sort of people we see ourselves as being.
Mm.
Um, and they're wonderful stories, and there's quite a lot of truth in all of them, but there's also um, a lot of kind of not misinformation, but there's a lot kind of omitted from those three stories as well.
Mm.
But that's how you make good national myths, though, isn't it?
Mm.
You weave them into a really really good yarn.
Yeah.
But in the case of there's a very quite well-known book, the Myth of the Blitz by Angus Calder. I don't know whether you've come across
I haven't
that.
read it, no.
But he was the first. I mean, I think goes back about 30 or 40 years, that book. He wrote that and The People's War, and these were the first really high-profile revisionist accounts of national life in Britain during the Second World War that
Mm.
said it's not what you think, and we weren't all in it together.
Mm.
And one of the points that he makes actually is that despite this sort of idea of kind of national mission is happening still at a time when class stratification in Britain didn't change in any way during the Second World War.
Mm.
There was and it returns with a vengeance after the war. So the all in it together notion
Mm.
has to be qualified by the fact that there were still huge disparities between wealth and poverty, despite in some cases life getting slightly better for poorer people.
But don't you think that fed into the sort of anger and the hunger for better social equality afterwards, which sort of ended
Yeah.
up the welfare state,
Yeah,
like
think
after
so.
the First World War, it was a tremendous sort of feeling of, now we've done this for you.
Yeah.
We want something in return. We want homes fit for heroes, and and some more equality.
I think there was that, and I think the fact that in 1945 and then again in 1949, by 1949, everywhere from Austria to China had found itself arguably a credible alternative that and you were going to find welfare states across the Western world emerge as a thing. Well, we better give ordinary people something here.
Yeah.
And I think that there was perhaps what had happened during the war is where that element of popular national mission had emerged and had been kind of part of the national psyche. people said, yeah, well, let's continue afterwards. Let's create this new kind of post-imperial country, because the empire's obviously on the wane.
Wow,
Um,
falling to pieces, yeah.
yeah, that will be, arguably, a more egalitarian country.
Mm.
And, a certain element of society spent about 40 years rolling that back, and they really, really got their results in about 1979. But yeah, I think also what people had seen during the war was the state works.
Yeah.
Oh
my goodness, that is so, that never fails to amaze me how quickly things were mobilized, that documents were printed, ways of doing things like rationing was sort of sorted out, and people were galvanized to collect clothes and distribute clothes for people who'd lost everything in the Blitz. And, amazing posters were designed and printed, and absolutely incredible sort of national move to communicate.
Yeah. And there's this, I was talking about this on the podcast only the other day. A.J.P. Taylor wrote this History of Britain from England, 1914 to 1945. And it literally, on the first few pages, he says, the England before the First World War, the state didn't really intrude into people's lives. There weren't ID cards. There weren't really passports. You can, if you had a bit of money, you can do what you want with it. There weren't currency controls. You can, the idea that the government did any of these things to kind of liberal Englishmen was a bit abhorrent, and that all, 2 world wars ended all of that, and the state at the end of the Second World War had a huge, much bigger role than anyone could possibly have imagined in 1914. But I suppose you fight in wars of national survival. And
certainly the Second World War was that, I think.
For sure. But then I think what's interesting about your story here is this is almost the kind of, whilst these big dramatic events are happening.
Pluto TV has thousands of free movies and TV shows.
What? This is the mindset.
Free.
This is the mantra.
Free.
This is the
with movies like Joe Dirt, Pixels, and 50 First Dates. This is awesome. And TV shows like Survivor, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Ghosts. Pluto TV is always free.
Huzzah!
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
You're welcome.
And the world, society and the way that everything functions is changing.
Yeah,
you've got these little people that the people that kind of slip between the cracks.
Yes, well, that is, I mean, as much as Gordon Cummings or my Gordon gets away with murder, they do too, because they slip between the cracks, because nobody's looking. At this time. And I was just thinking, another sort of mythology of Britain is our fascination with serial killers, particularly poisoners. We're very keen on poisoners, and it seems to be a peculiarly British crime, actually.
Yeah, well, I suppose, I mean, I'm sure a lot of this kind of comes from the kind of Victorian detective stories and things like that.
But I mean, that was the other. Oh gosh, somebody's ringing my doorbell. Just leave it. Anyway. Wait, that's something being delivered. Sorry, it's very distracting. Okay. Oh God, I've lost my train of thought now.
Poison.
Yes, going back to poison. It was a particularly, I think it was a particularly British or English crime, and it was a particularly 19th century crime because it was so available everywhere. And it was cheap as well. They said that a penny of arsenic could wipe out a whole street, and the high street was absolutely full of it. It was, on the chemist shop, you could just legitimately buy all sorts of deadly potions that you could then feed to your family. But one of my characters is he's a within the book of research. He's a researcher into poisoners and poisoning because he's fascinated by it. Originally, the case of Crippen, which is a notorious British poisoner of the 1890s. No, it's actually Edwardian, wasn't he? It was after the 1890s. Anyway, he becomes obsessed and is rather upset that actually now various laws and constraints have been brought in. Oh, God. Can I just answer that?
Yeah, you carry on. I'll just right. You did. So here we are back again. So
Sorry.
that's okay. I just pauses there. Yes, don't worry about that at all. So so we were talking there about the British fascination with serial killers, or I guess if you broaden it out, the George Orwell wrote about the decline of the English murder, didn't he?
Yes.
And the kind of the British fascination with crime in general. I used to work in a variety of bookshops, and my most least favorite part of the store was the true crime section. Always had that sort of, well, these are real people, and this is not entertainment. This is I mean, years before that, I'd worked as a crime reporter and seen,
Did you?
yeah, long time ago, and seen what real violence does to people. And I've always got the view that read about it in Agatha Christie, but honestly, the real thing shouldn't be treated as entertainment. But
that's very much become the case with the Jack the Ripper, hasn't it? I mean, it's just an industry, isn't it? I mean, if the Daily Mail doesn't have a new suspect, who it really was, every month, you're missing out.
Yes. Well, I mean, and it's possible you could. There's a whole industry around it. I know Patricia Cornwell wrote a famous and now I think much debunked thesis that it was. I think she said it was the painter Walter Sickert.
Yeah. She bought one of his paintings and dissembled it so she could try and find DNA.
Yeah.
But she also, because there must have been some DNA from Jack the Ripper, I think there's something, isn't there? Some article of clothing that possibly belonged to him.
Yeah.
He did not prove her case.
No. Well, my father-in-law is an art historian and a specialist in Walter Sickert, and debunked that one many times over. So my father-in-law 1, Patricia Cornwell 0. But I mean, I guess coming back to your book, there's an.
We all prefer things a certain way, like groceries. If you want groceries just how you like them, you gotta try Instacart. They have a new preference picker that lets you pick how ripe or unripe you want your bananas. Shoppers can see your preferences upfront, helping guide their choices. Because when it comes to groceries, the details matter. Instacart. Get groceries just how you like.
There's a kind of an interesting crossover between crime and the Blitz. Did Sarah Waters? Did she write something about?
Yes. It's about an ambulance. It's called the Night Watch. It's about an ambulance crew, mostly women, I think, who were working.
And then I was reading a biography of Graham Greene the other year, and sort of the end of the affair is always this kind of almost kind of ghost story around the Blitz. And I think there's something about the way that we imagine it, the kind of the atmosphere of the fact that at night all the lights are off except for searchlights in the sky, and there's this kind of fear of what is going to happen, and it's an immensely kind of rich territory for writing fiction around, I guess.
I was thinking that the sort of closest we, in our personal experience, have come to that was COVID, that sort of fever dream of life not being, suddenly life being completely upended and not what you were used to.
Yeah.
And being very isolated, which obviously the Blitz did as well. You'd hurry home through the dark. You couldn't socialise, you couldn't really go out.
No.
I mean, pubs probably were open, but it wasn't much fun. All the windows were blacked out. You were frightened of going back at night because you might be,
Yeah.
you might die.
But I think that sense of life being upended is the key bit there
Yeah.
of this being this fundamental disruption to the functioning of the everyday.
Hmm.
And in that there's the possibility that anything can happen in that time.
Well, you can die. You can die
Yeah.
suddenly and instantly.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps also because one of my characters is young, she's only 17, like COVID, there's that idea that my life's been interrupted. That I'm not doing all the things I ought to be doing. I'm not going out to dances because there are no dances.
Yeah.
So again, I think you can extrapolate from your own experience, perhaps a little bit of what it felt like in the past.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, and that's all we can do really
Yeah.
is to try to kind of make sense of what has happened using the kind of the framework of what is happening now.
Mm.
And this is why when you have moments of crisis in post-war Britain, during the 3-day week in 1973 and during the COVID or what have you,
Mm.
people will get out the bunting and say keep calm and carry on. And my great grandmother had it far harder than this in the Blitz and all
Yeah, yeah.
this kind
Well, we're
of
going back
stuff.
to the plucky little nation myth.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. We didn't fight 2 world wars for this kind of thing, all that sort of stuff. And it's like, well, that's part of, any country has a version of this. Some countries have far darker versions of this,
Mm.
but we have our own shared
Mm.
historical and cultural kind of DNA
Mm. And we
almost.
didn't actually have to confront anything too absolutely terrible in a way. We weren't invaded. We
No,
didn't lose our sense of self like so many other nations did during
yeah,
and after the war. So we didn't exactly have it lucky, but we came out of it fairly unscathed, I think, with a fixed idea of who we were.
yeah, not poorer.
Yeah,
Uh,
poor. Yeah, a lot poorer.
yeah. Well, I think that seems like a kind of a good place to sort of just talk a bit about the book. So is it currently available, or are we
It's
awaiting
not.
publication?
Publication will be on the 24th of April.
20th of April.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's called All Cats Are Grey.
Okay. And will be available, I'm guessing, in all good bookshops.
Yes, I hope so. I think it might be available mostly online, I'm afraid.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's like that's actually not a bad thing. But what we always say at the end of each podcast is, please buy it from an independent retailer,
Yeah.
even if it's an independent online retailer. If you
Yeah.
can't find a retailer that's sort of small and needs your support, go straight to the publisher and get it from them because they'll need your
Very
support.
good idea. It's
Um,
Barthwick Hill is the publisher.
Barthwick Hill, so not one of the kind of the giants.
No,
So
small independent publisher.
and small independent publishers and retailers are part of this rich ecosystem that supports writers and will actually, in some cases, give chances to new writers that the big names won't touch. And obviously, don't buy from Amazon. Support this infrastructure because you'll miss it when it's gone.
Yeah, so right.
Well, Susan, it was lovely to chat with you today, and the very best of for opportunities for the book, and really hope that's going to be a big success. And it would be really lovely to talk to you again about poison and bomb sites and all of these things if you have the time in the future.
Absolutely, I'll be very happy to. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Welcome to A to Z Savings, our biggest sale of the year.
Happy to be here. Can I get some rotors?
Would you like brake pads with that?
How much are the brake pads?
Free with Duralast rotors.
Free. Really?
Really? Free.
I also need some oil.
Would you like an oil filter with that?
Yeah. How much is that?
Free with the oil.
Free. Really?
Really. Free. It's part of A to Z Savings with hundreds of deals.
From A to free.
Get in the zone, AutoZone.
Ends March 9th. Restrictions apply.
Okay, does this happen to anybody else? You sit down with a juicy QPC, some McNuggets, and those golden fries from McDonald's. Then you take a long sip of your Sprite because you can still hear your mama saying, don't fill up on that drink before you eat your food. But you're grown now, so you do what you want.
Share and share alike with the 20-piece McNuggets from McDonald's for just $6. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.